Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. Yes, Purdue basketball did just take down Hofstra, but that is the last thing on anyone's mind right now. For the first time in this podcast's history, it's coaching search time. Jeff Brohm has taken the Louisville job, as was widely expected, and now Purdue is looking for a new football coach to replace one of the better ones in school history. Here on the show today, we're going to talk about the Purdue job. We're going to talk about some potential candidates. And we'll talk a little bit about Jeff Brohm's legacy at Purdue here on the show today. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. I'll be there tweeting updates whenever I see something, hear something related to this coaching search the whole time. It is going to be a busy one. I think it's going to be a fairly quick one, which means it's going to be action-packed. You're going to want to follow along on Twitter. Come join the conversation. Tweet at me your thoughts. What do you think about the job? Who do you want to see Purdue go get? All of that stuff. Always fun to interact with you all. So at Boilers Beyond on Twitter. Come hang out, join the conversation there. Look, I'm recording this Wednesday night. Jeff Brohm left about 10 hours ago at this point was when the report started to come out, and this should not have come as a surprise to anybody. This was rumored for a long time. This was one that around the West Lafayette area was a pretty poorly kept secret that Jeff Brohm and the Brohm family were ready to get back to Louisville. If you're, on the message boards, there was some pretty constant conversation about this being a possibility. The whole issue and the whole holdup was Scott Satterfield at Louisville. Early on this year, it looked like he was a dead man walking, but they went on a win streak. They finished 7-5, and while that probably would have been good enough to where the optics didn't necessitate firing him, or where the optics couldn't have gone well if they fired him, Satterfield leaving for Cincinnati was a move that certainly nobody at Louisville balked at. They were able to now get their favorite son, get their favorite family back to Louisville. And look, the quote over the summer said it all. After the 2018 season, it was too early to leave. That's how Jeff Brohm felt. I don't know that that's how the Brohm family necessarily felt, but that's how Jeff Brohm felt. And it was probably that was probably the truth. That would have been awfully early. But now, after 6 years, it certainly is not. I think really this whole move could have been done last year had Louisville decided to move on from Satterfield. I think there were plenty of people at Louisville ready to do it. I think Jeff Brohm was ready to do it. But for whatever reason, it did not go through. It got held up. It went another year. And really, the home poll is just something that Purdue was never going to be able to match. And I know, the logic from every argument that Jeff Brohm wouldn't leave is Big Ten money. The ACC's not as prestigious. The money's not there. Look, the report out there from Chris Lowe, I think, was 6-year, $35 million. It's $6 million a year. It's not a family that seems like they just burn through money. At what point is $5 to $6 million just enough? I don't think this is a money play at all. I think Purdue could have thrown more money down if they really wanted, but I don't know that that would have kept Jeff Brohm at Purdue. I know that the Big Ten is a tougher conference, but maybe the ACC is a little bit more winnable, especially with USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten. That doesn't make it easier. And at the end of the day, I don't think this is as much of a referendum on Purdue, of Jeff Brohm wanting to leave Purdue, as much as it is he's ready to return to Louisville thing. And at that point, there's nothing Purdue could have done to stop this. When it opened up on Monday, this thing was a done deal. That press conference with Jeff Brohm and Mike Babinski was awkward as hell. You could tell Jeff Brohm, I don't know if he had told Mike Babinski he was leaving at that point. Probably not. But Mike Babinski knew absolutely well that Jeff Brohm would not be coaching in the bowl game. I am very surprised that Brian Brohm was named the interim coach for the bowl game. I don't think that's going to go well, if we're just being honest here. I don't think that's going to go very well. I don't think this is going to be a great bowl performance from Purdue. But, as you look at this job now, it's open for the first time since 2016. In 2016, there were some very, very legitimate questions about this job that Purdue had no proof of concept how to answer. At that time, the Kozic Performance Center or Complex or whatever the name is, that was not open yet. It was being constructed, but it wasn't open yet. You now have that. That is a good facility. You have the indoor field. You have a quality facility for the football program to fall back on. You now have the dining facility going in the north end zone. Everything from that standpoint, a facility standpoint, is a lot better than it was in 2016. The stadium has been vastly updated. They had the tiny little video board that Mike Babinski kind of said they never knew if it was going to turn on or not. And then they had the ancient relic that was the north end zone scoreboard at that point. In 2016, they didn't have lights on the stadium. That's all been changed. You have the massive video board. You have the nice looking ribbon board. They're redoing the tunnel area and the south end zone. From just a facility point as a whole, looking at the stadium, that's gotten better. Financially, Purdue has invested in football in a way they haven't before. You look at the past. Part of the big issue with Joe Tiller was that his staff didn't get enough money. He lost a lot of really good assistants. When Purdue hired Danny Hope, it was the ultimate inexpensive play. He was making less than $1 million. Darrell Hazel was a bad hire, but it's not like $2 million was some big investment into the football program. And there's no doubt that Purdue's lack of investment absolutely hampered that 2012 search, now a decade ago. But Darrell Hazel was far from Purdue's first choice there. Their lack of investment really hurt them then. That's completely changed now. Jeff Brohm came in making over $3 million a year. That quickly jumped to over $7 million after the 2018 flirtation with Louisville. Assistant coaches have gotten some raises in recent years. Purdue is clearly invested in football at a financial level more than it ever has been. And I think it's really important you have some proof of concept as it relates to winning. When this job was open last, Purdue had gone 9-36, 9-39, 9-39, I think, over the past 4 years. That isn't, you had to look at that and wonder what could happen. What really was the ceiling of Purdue at that point? Now, Jeff Brohm has turned that into a program that just won 8 games back-to-back years, won the Big Ten West, got to Indianapolis. You have some proof of concept that you can get things done at Purdue. Now, it is fair to wonder in the new Big Ten how this job exactly stacks up. There are some really, really good jobs in this conference. You look at Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, clearly. USC, clearly. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Michigan State. I mean, there are a lot of jobs in this conference that you would probably look at and say are better than Purdue. It's probably not a top half job, but it's very competitive. You have really strong fan support. That's not something that some other programs in the same ballpark of Purdue can say. A lot of empty seats over at Memorial Stadium when Purdue was there this year at Illinois. Ditto down in Bloomington. Minnesota doesn't quite get those sold-out crowds the way Purdue has the last couple years. So you've seen Purdue have some great fan support. The money is obviously there. It's a Big Ten job. You know what that new media rights deal looks like. Purdue does have a strong group of donors in the John Purdue Club. So the money is there. You have to ask what the ceiling is, and that's important for whoever Purdue hires. It doesn't matter if they go the group of 5 route, if they can poach a Power 5 coach, if they get a hotshot assistant, an up-and-comer. However it goes, you have to have reasonable expectations here. One of the talking points about Jeff Brohm leaving is, did Purdue kind of hit that ceiling the last couple years? Because if that's the case, if that's how Jeff Brohm felt, then getting out is the smartest thing to do. Once you've hit your ceiling, people get impatient really quickly. Now, I don't know that I necessarily agree that Purdue is completely maxed out its ceiling. I think a certain level of consistency in doing that year over year is important. But there's no doubt, when the divisions go away after next season, when you have a 16-team league with USC and UCLA and some of the non-conference schedules you have lined up for the future, it's not easy. This is not a place where you're going to walk in and win 10 games every year. Purdue's won 10 games once ever. Purdue hasn't finished the season in the top 25 since 2003, and since 2007, Purdue spent 1 week ranked in the top 25. So, there's a ways to go, but from an overall record standpoint, 8-4 is pretty good. 9-3 is unreal. And 6-6, 7-5, I think that's acceptable. You want to have those high ceilings, you want to have those good years, but 6-6, 7-5 can't really be a bad year. The biggest question to me is Purdue's financial investment here and what that means for who they can hire. I've got coaches to watch here after this point, but Jeff Brohm made over $5 million when he was at Purdue. And when they signed him to that deal in 2018, following the first Louisville watch, however you want to put it, that was a top 10 deal in the country. It is not even close to a top 10 deal in the country anymore. It has been blown out of the park. If you look at the Big Ten alone, Matt Rule just got $9 million. Luke Fickell just got about almost $8 million. I think 7.9. Mel Tucker got $9.5 million. Now that one's probably a bit nuts, but these are the numbers you're dealing with. You know what Ryan Day's making. You know what Jim Harbaugh, James Franklin are making. That $5 million is pretty status quo in the Big Ten. Like I saw PJ Fleck just got a bump up to $6 million. So how ready is Purdue to go spend money? I mean, are they willing to put big, a $6 to $7 to $8 million deal on the table to try to get a Power 5 coach away? I don't know. I don't know what to expect there. I think assistant coach salary pools absolutely are going to be a discussion. We saw this across the Big Ten West. Purdue's coordinators are not paid the way other schools' coordinators are. You look at Ryan Walters over at Illinois. He's a $1 million defensive coordinator. Purdue doesn't have that. Now, it helped that you had Brian Brohm as your offensive coordinator, probably get a little bit of a family discount there. But how open is Purdue to blowing up the coaching salaries a little bit for assistants and for the head coach? Is $5 million the floor? Would they like to get below that? I don't know. But Purdue's financial willingness here is going to be really important to watch. looking at coaches to watch here, and it's not easy to necessarily look at this and just have some great list of guys. There is certainly no go-to guy here that jumps off the page as makes sense. Absolutely, he is your guy that is can't miss. Not that there was in 2016 either. Purdue certainly had Jeff Brohm high up, but from an outside perspective, there was no go-to guy. I've got 3 categories here: Group of 5, Power 5, and then some coordinators. These are guys who I think are worth calling. I think are worth pursuing. These aren't in an order of my preference, just kind of a list here. But I will say, in the Group of 5 level, I think the top guy I would be interested in is Tyson Helton from Western Kentucky, which would be funny enough, getting another Western Kentucky guy back-to-back times that would be. But he's kind of the same deal as Jeff Brohm. A big offense. He was the quarterback's coach in OC along with Brian Brohm when Jeff was at Kentucky or Western Kentucky. So it's a similar hire to what Jeff Brohm was, but he's a younger guy. He's in his 40s, a high-energy coach. I think he makes a lot of sense. Willie Fritz at Tulane has done a really nice job in not a very easy spot to win. Tulane certainly has its academic restrictions that make that job a little bit more difficult. I think he's clearly an excellent coach. The downside is there aren't a lot of Midwest ties there. I don't know that that's what it used to be in terms of importance, but you would have to create a staff that has some ties to the area. Jason Candle at Toledo is an interesting one to me. Now, Toledo's one of the better jobs in the MAC, so it helps when you are at one of the better jobs in your area, but I think he's a name to keep an eye on. He's one there. Jeff Traylor at UTSA is another big offense type of guy, but he kind of tweeted out tonight that he's not interested in other jobs. Of course, that doesn't always mean much, but I don't know that I see that. He's a Texan through and through as well. I don't know about the fit. And then I'll go Kane Womack from South Alabama, a guy who I didn't initially think of. He's young. He is defensive-minded, which I don't have a lot of guys on here that I'm real comfortable with that are defensive-minded. He was at Indiana as an assistant. He was at South Alabama as the head coach, has them winning well. He's a guy who I could absolutely see being kind of that hotshot coach who, if it's not this cycle where he gets a job, it'll be the next one. The Power 5 job flips are where I'm incredibly intrigued to see where Purdue can go here. Again, I don't know that this is all that realistic. It's going to take a lot of money to do this, and it's got to take interest. I thought Chris Vanini from The Athletic had a really good point about this Purdue job. Yes, it is a Big Ten job. There is Big Ten money, but it's not as appealing as Wisconsin and Nebraska, and that's certainly true. But this is kind of a barometer here to see how much pull that Big Ten money really has. I'm going to be fascinated to see. If Purdue can get one of these guys, though, I think you've got to be pretty happy with that. I think that's a hire that is about the name. Not necessarily about the name, but it brings a big-time name with it. And that's something that would get fans excited. I do know for a lot of folks, a Group of 5 coach just coming in probably wouldn't get people all that fired up. You look at some of these Power 5 names that I'm interested in. Number one for me would be Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. The guy has won everywhere he's been. North Dakota State, he absolutely dominated. Goes to Kansas State, which I think is a pretty tough job. I know they're the better of their 2 in-state programs, but outside of Bill Snyder, Kansas State's never done a thing. he just won a Big 12 championship there. You wonder if he has that kind of feeling that Jeff Brohm may have had, that I accomplished all I can accomplish here, time to move on. If that's the case, you take a Brinks truck to Manhattan and go get him, because he is a heck of a coach. I think Matt Campbell at Iowa State is a really interesting one. 2 years ago, he was on top of the world. He just got in Iowa State to a New Year's Six bowl. The last 2 years haven't been as planned. I think they went 7-6 last year before 4-8 this year. Iowa State is as tough of a Power 5 job as there is. That one is a really, really tough spot to win. He's won there. He's not some big offense guy, but I think his coaching prowess is well established. Dave Doran's been at North Carolina State for a while now. You wonder if he'd be ready to move on. He was obviously a big target of Purdue's back in 2012 that they missed out, but you wonder if they would kind of look at that opportunity, as well as Dave Clawson at Wake Forest. He brings a very different offensive philosophy. That slow mesh is really, really something. I would worry a little bit about how that would play in the Big Ten West, a very physical league, but the guy can clearly coach. Winning at Wake, another place that's not easy to win, and he's done it at. I wonder about Jed Fish at Arizona. He'd be a risk. His record is not good. He inherited a dumpster fire. He inherited that from Kevin Sumlin, who is a name that gets thrown out there because he's a Purdue alum. I absolutely cannot see that one. That one makes very little sense to me. For the life of me, I don't see that one. And I don't see Jed Fish either. Just a name to keep an eye on, really. Just kind of throwing stuff out there. But those are some of the main ones. Kleiman, Campbell, Dave Doran, Dave Clawson. I mean, these are guys who, if the Big Ten money is the Big Ten money and you want to go spend it and you get some interest there, that's a job. Those are jobs that you can buy someone out of, more or less. I don't know that I think Purdue will go the coordinator route. They really haven't in a while, depending on how you categorize Danny Hope. I mean, I guess he did have experience before as a head coach for a very brief period of time, but he was an assistant for the most part. He was an offensive line coach. A coordinator, though, Jim Leonard is, again, keep an eye on him. I don't know about defensive-minded guys. That's where the hang-up would be, if you ask me. You'd want to have a really good plan on the offensive side of the ball, especially coming from a program that wasn't all that good on offense. But I think he's an interesting name. Garrett Riley would probably be my favorite coordinator potential. He's very young. He's like 33 years old. Won the Broyles Award this year. He's an unbelievable offensive mind. He's done some awesome things there. He's kind of got the genes, being Lincoln Riley's brother. That would be a pretty interesting one. Bill O'Brien's a name that gets thrown out there. I don't know that I see it. I think Nick Saban would love that. Nick Saban would drive him to West Lafayette himself, but I don't know that I necessarily see that one being a fantastic fit, just because, things haven't gone well at Alabama after they really didn't go well at the Houston Texans. There's been a major player push on social media for Jamarcus Shepard, former Purdue wide receiver coach. Now he's the wide receivers coach, co-OC out at Washington. It's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of it. I don't know that I necessarily see it, but he is an Indiana native. He is, he's young. He's a strong recruiter, energized. He's someone who I think certainly should be in play for the offensive coordinator spot, especially if Purdue hires an offensive-minded guy. I think that would be interesting. I don't know that I see him as the head coach. That's kind of my list. I mean, I know that's a lot of names. I think Helton's kind of your guy. Womack in there as well. With the Power 5 names, I know folks are going to say Kalen DeBoer. I don't know that you can get him away from Washington. Some of the programs that I think if Purdue really threw some money on the table, you could outbid someone, would be a Kansas State, an Iowa State, an NC State, a Wake Forest. I don't know that you can do that at a Washington. They've got some pretty legit money, even though they're in the Pac-12. I don't see that one as much. Dan Mullen being out of coaching, I apprehend at guys who are notedly not all that interested in recruiting, because at Purdue you're going to have to recruit like hell. Guys aren't going to fall into your lap. If Darrell Hazel wasn't the ultimate proof of that, I don't know what was. He was an Ohio State guy who at Ohio State, especially under Jim Tressel, when they just really recruited regionally, they could swoop in at the last minute and land a guy. That's not how it is at Purdue. Purdue has to hire someone who's very energetic and strong as a recruiter. That's my list for now. Obviously, we'll keep updating moving forward. We'll keep talking about it on here, on Twitter. Wanted to close a little bit today talking about Jeff Brohm's legacy at Purdue, because that's going to be the main point here. And, in fairness, it certainly could be viewed as a negative towards this if he goes and takes current players or flips recruits to Louisville. That's part of it. That's life in the bigs. I don't really blame Jeff. If players are wanting to come with him to Louisville too, so be it. In general, the timing on this is pretty good for everybody. You look back at 2018, and the timing would have been really difficult. There was clear reason to be excited about the immediate future at Purdue. Jeff Brohm was landing the best recruiting class in recent memory at Purdue. At that point, with David Bell, George Karlaftis, Milton Wright, Marvin Grant was in that year, I believe, Jalen Graham. Really loaded group that year. Just a fantastic recruiting class. There was a lot left to do. That year finished so strong. Purdue started 0-3, finished 6-6. There was a lot of optimism there. Louisville was kind of a mess. It wasn't a good time for them. And 2 years just isn't all that long. It wouldn't have worked then. Now, it's year 6. I guess year 6 is over. Jeff Brohm has brought Purdue to the top of the Big Ten West. He's gotten them over some rivals. He got them realistically as far as you could have ever hoped for when he took the job over in December of 2016. I think when you look ahead to next year, it's a very natural spot to reset. Next year's roster doesn't look to be all that great. Let's be honest here. Purdue loses a ton. And I think it sounds like there's going to be some legitimate portal turnover as well. You just saw Spencer Holstead transfer. He's not going to be the last one, but losing starters like that, established starters, certainly a reason for concern. So you combine that with a really brutal 2023 schedule, and I think it's a natural time for Jeff Brohm to look to get out. And from a Purdue perspective, you have a great coach in Jeff Brohm who is now gone, and that hurts. Let's not act like this is a great thing for Purdue, because hiring coaches is difficult. This is at best a 50-50 proposition, whether it's going to get better, whether it's going to get worse. It's not easy to improve on 8-4 seasons. You have some infrastructure in place, and if you nail the hire, you can. But it's easy to go backwards as well. This isn't ideal for Purdue, but at some point, having your head coach connected to another job constantly, that couldn't sustain. I don't know how Jeff Brohm handled that in recruiting, but you know it had to be used against Purdue like crazy. And granted, if you look at the pure recruiting rankings of the classes, maybe that has been an impact. I don't know. But Louisville rumors had to die one way or another. And if Satterfield hadn't left and came into next season on the status he was after this, it would have been another, probably even more of a season full of Jeff Brohm to Louisville talk. Are they going to fire him? All of that. He accomplished everything Purdue could have hoped for. They're a Big Ten West champion. He went over 500, both in Big Ten and overall, over the course of his 6 years. That seemed like a long shot. That really did. He brought a competitive mindset right away to a program that needed it. The program was non-competitive for a long time before that. And right away, he came in there and he changed the mentality. That 2017 season, in my eyes, will always be a bit of a minor miracle because you saw what that roster did. And yes, he brought over some guys from Western Kentucky. He brought in some junior college guys that really helped. But man, that roster was not a 6-win, go to the bowl game and win it type of roster against a guy like Khalil Tate especially. That was one of the more fun seasons I can remember. 2018, same deal. You only went 6-6, but the way you did it was so fun. You had big wins against Ohio State. You went to Nebraska and won, which felt big at the time. Beating Iowa at home, beating Indiana to win the bucket, go to a bowl again. There were some downtimes. The 2019, 2020 seasons, those weren't fun. People weren't happy at that point, but he bounced back right away. And now, over the past 2 seasons, 9-4, 8-5, that's pretty good. When you look at what's real at Purdue, 8-win seasons aren't exactly a dime a dozen. That's not, you can open up Purdue's football reference page, and with the exception of 97 to 2006, there aren't a lot of 8-win seasons on there. So you look at the big wins, building momentum for the program. 2018 Ohio State was unforgettable. One of the greatest moments in Purdue history. You had a pair of top 5 wins last year in 2021. And I know Iowa and Michigan State were not legitimately in the 5 best teams in the country. But still, that brings attention. You had that bowl game win over Tennessee, which, Purdue fans are never going to forget that. You had some awesome moments in there. You had some real talent. One of the things that Purdue had their pride in for so long was their Super Bowl streak. They had a Purdue player in the Super Bowl for so long. And after, 8 years of Danny Hope and Darrell Hazel combining to not put much talent in the NFL, that streak ended. But you're looking at what Purdue's doing now. Rondale Moore, David Bell, George Karlaftis. There are a lot of guys who are just a bit of a notch below as well. Guys who have been really good. You look at a Jawan Bentley sticking around in the NFL. You look at a Derek Barnes off to a good start. Guys who project to get there. Jalen Graham. That there's a bit more of an influx of that type of talent that makes things exciting. The last 6 seasons as a whole have been phenomenal for Purdue. And what they got back was their fan base. Part of the reason Danny Hope was fired after going 6-6 back-to-back years was because fan apathy had reached a really high level. Attendance was down. The passion was fading that was there for the Joe Tiller years. And unfortunately, to say they whiffed on the next hire is an understatement. And the apathy exploded. Fans just really lost interest in Purdue football. That changed right away. You saw it the last 2 seasons with unreal attendance. You saw it early on, though. In that first season, that Michigan game almost sold out. That Indiana game, I think, did sell out when Purdue won that to go to a bowl game. I mean, that went as well as you possibly could have hoped. He got the university to invest in football, and that comes from the university seeing proof of concept, seeing that, hey, this could work. That really helps. That made this job a lot better for his successor. There's no perfect way to leave a job. And the way this opened up, the way this happened, probably not ideal. But I'll say this, just from a Purdue perspective, you should probably be glad it didn't happen last week. You got to enjoy the Big Ten championship game without it. Now, look, it's going to overshadow the bowl, no doubt, but you're on to a new coach. You kind of knew it was coming. I think Mike Babinski knew this was coming to a certain degree. This shouldn't have been a surprise. I think Purdue should be ready to act pretty quickly. I don't know when they will have a new coach announced, but it wouldn't be surprising. I'm recording this Wednesday night. It wouldn't surprise me if by this time next week, Purdue's got their guy. That wouldn't surprise me at all. You'll want to be sure to follow on Twitter @BoilersBeyond for plenty of news, updates, all of that. I will plan to be back here on Sunday night. We'll talk about Purdue, Nebraska, and basketball. We'll talk about, there wasn't that much to talk about from Hofstra when Purdue got up 20 to 2 or whatever, and then defense fell off, but they finished okay. We'll talk some basketball. We'll talk coaching search. We'll see what's new. If I got to jump on for an emergency pod before then, we will do it. We'll do whatever we need to do here, but we'll be back later this week. Be back next week with more content coverage. Subscribe so you don't miss any of that. And until then, guys, enjoy your flight tracking software of choice.